Hello, everybody. I am so excited to see such a great turnout tonight. I'm glad there's no football or snow keeping us away. I would like to introduce Reverend Dr. Tracy Mehr-Muska. I was not familiar with Tracy before this, so I spent a little time kind of learning about her so that I could share with all of you. She is an ordained Presbyterian minister, university chaplain at Wesleyan University in Middletown, board certified interfaith chaplain, a Coast Guard veteran, a wife and a mother, and she has ministered in trauma hospitals, prisons, psychiatric hospitals, universities, and hospice. She is also the author of Weathering the Storm, Simple Strategies for Being Peaceful and Prepared. And this is, I believe, the book from which she's going to share a lot of insights with us tonight. She also did bring a number of copies of the book. If anybody's interested in purchasing it tonight, it's also available in the library. West Hartford Library has it. I don't know if Rocky Hill does, but that's another option as well. When we're done, we would like anybody who is interested to fill out a suggestion card. It says, thank you for attending tonight. Are there any other topics related to mental health that you would like to see addressed in the future? So please, if there are things that you're, hoping that the WISE team will explore, please share that with us. And with that, Reverend Muska, I would like to offer you a gift that the WISE team has gotten for you and ask you to come up and share. Thank you. You're so welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me. And I want to welcome the people who are joining us virtually as well. This is fun to be able to have this conversation both with you in the room and people at home. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to resilience is the fact that it is really hard to talk about resilience without it feeling personal. Because as we're engaging in this conversation, you may think of occasions in your life when you needed to tap into your resilience. And those occasions may have been difficult or painful. So I do invite you to take breaks as you need. I won't be offended if you go off to the bathroom, if you give yourself a few minutes of time. So do please feel free to do that. So why did I start studying resilience? I went back to get my Doctor of Ministry degree and was asked, well, what do you want to study? What do you want to do your Doctor of Ministry project about? And I said, well, I work in higher education and people will not stop talking about resilience. So maybe that's something I should learn a little bit more about. And again, the deeper I got into my research, the more I realized that it was also because of my own life experiences that I realized that this was an important topic to me. When I looked back at my own experiences with sexual harassment and sexual assault in the military, and also I observed and witnessed a traumatic event in high school, I realized how haphazardly I dealt with hardship, difficulty, and trauma. And then I said, you know what? There has to be a better way. It has to be better than just muddling along and hoping we get through something. So here we are. Today, we're going to talk about what resilience is. We're going to talk about what constitutes it. And we're going to talk about some strategies that we can be working on in advance of hardship, trauma, or difficulty that'll help us be better prepared and maybe feel more peaceful. This applies for us if we ourselves are going through hardship or difficulty, or people we might be caring for. So again, in terms of people with mental health challenges, what you'll learn here will hopefully be very applicable to helping people along that difficult and challenging journey. So again, I don't need to tell you this. We talk about why is resilience important.
Are you? One of my favorite people.
Oh, thanks for coming. So why talk about resilience? As it turns out, about 90% of people will experience some sort of trauma or difficulty if we haven't already. We also realize that There is an increase in the amount of anxiety and depression that people are experiencing. And in higher education, among my college students, we're seeing a lot of this. 28% of my students were diagnosed with ongoing or chronic depression. 50% reported, oh, this is nationwide, 50% reported feeling worthless. 66%, 2/3 reported feeling hopelessness, and 2/3 were feeling isolated. So this is a real crisis we're experiencing, but not just among college students. Really, I think every demographic is experiencing a sense of increased anxiety, maybe because of the political climate, the national climate, maybe because of our relationships, maybe because of climate change. There's a variety of things that are plaguing us right now and making us concerned. There's also, I think, an increasing, especially among younger adults, which is who I work with primarily, this idea of the fear of failure. And I think that also applies regardless of our age or demographic. And then again, the rise in loneliness. You may have heard that there are certain countries that are actually establishing the ministry of loneliness, people who are dedicated to trying to help people feel more connected. And you'll see as we go through this presentation why that's important. So, who am I? So I am an ordained Presbyterian minister, and I serve at Wesleyan University as the one of the university chaplains. And again, I am super excited and passionate about the idea of resilience, and I'm so glad to be here to talk about it. And what we're planning on talking about today is doing a little overview of resilience, talking about some of the characteristics of resilience, how we can cultivate resilience, and then have some time for Q&A. And during the presentation, I also invite you to raise your hand, or if you're joining us virtually, you can send a question into the chat and Alan can pass that on to us. And also, I'm going to invite you to answer some questions as we talk about what these things mean and what they are. So let's talk about resilience. So I have a definition that I'm going to show you on this next slide, and I'm going to read the definition, and then we're going to talk about what you don't like about it. Okay, so let me go through the definition first. So I want you to look at this definition with a very cynical and serious lens. So resilience is a simple set of characteristics that can be continuously cultivated to enable people to be emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually prepared for and positively transformed by trauma, disappointment, and difficulty. And just to highlight a few of those phrases, a set of characteristics. So this is what I am most excited about. And I'm from New Jersey. I tend to talk really fast, so slow me down if I get too excited. But it's a set, what I love to let people know is that resilience is not something that we're born with or not born with. It is a set of characteristics that we can cultivate. And scholars have recognized that resilient people have a common set of what they call protective factors. And these things are things we can be working on. And that's what we're going to be going through today. The second thing, simple. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Another aspect is continuously cultivated. Sometimes I feel like this might feel like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be done with this. I'm never just going to be resilient finally, once and for all. I wish that would be true. But because our circumstances and challenges are always changing, so too is our resilience. I like to think of it as a continuum. And sometimes there are things that are going to set us back on that continuum a bit. And sometimes there's things we're going to do or places we're going to be where we feel a little bit more capable. So I like to think of it as something we can continuously work on. And instead of it feeling like a Sisyphean effort, I'm hoping we'll realize that this can actually be really fun. Okay, the idea of being prepared for. I love the idea of it being like a fire drill. This is something we're practicing. And I joke about the idea of yoga. If you have a yoga practice, that's awesome. And if you're in the middle of something really hard, is that the best time to start a yoga practice? Maybe not. So the idea of us having some of these things in our toolbox and preparing for whatever might come our way. And this idea of transformation. Oh, sorry. This being transformed by. There is a lot of data that shows that resilience can, or that hardship can provoke in us what's called post-traumatic growth. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might look like. So I feel like every presentation needs a cute dog picture. So here's your cute dog picture. And also, tell me about what you don't like about this definition. Go ahead. All right. So okay. So we heard that that's simple. Like, is it really that simple? That's a great question. How about you? You're exactly right. And the other thing is this idea of being transformed by, because, sometimes we're just getting through something is a success in its own right. And maybe we don't need to be transformed by a hardship. Maybe just getting through it is perfectly good enough, right? So it does have a presumption of privilege in a way that we can experience this level of peacefulness and resilience. And it presume some, like a certain level maybe of ability and capability and resources. That's a fair critique. Thank you, Mally. So we're hearing maybe the definition is a little too complicated and it's long and there's a lot going on there that maybe clutters up what we're really getting at. Is that what I'm hearing?
Get rid of, yeah, 2 or 3 of those. Emotions, and even the last one, trauma, disappointment, and difficulty. Why can't we just make it one? Because trauma is part of difficulty, and disappointment is part of it. Needs to be much more brief for my point.
Thank you. So we have more feedback that it could be shorter, more succinct, and more clear. Yeah.
Tracy,
How about one more? Yeah.
so the Zoomers can't hear the people in the audience, so if you could at least maybe repeat the questions or pass
Microphone that
pass the mic.
if it's a shorter answer, I can reiterate it. Did you
It
have
should be all
something?
set,
Do you want to
that
just take
mic.
the microphone or something I can rephrase for our Zoomers?
That should be fine.
Testing.
At the risk of people not liking it, I'm a little wordy. Can you hear that? Okay. So oftentimes I find that when people are faced with a trauma, to suggest a positive result from that trauma
Mhm.
is almost offensive to
Yeah.
them. And they don't want positivity out of something that is so bad in their lives. So that can be, I think, offensive to people if they're not in a place to receive it.
Yes, thank you. Great comment. So I made this definition myself. I don't take it personally because all of your feedback is so, so true. And as we go through this, you'll see that a lot of what you say will present itself as we go through some of these characteristics. And I really appreciate all of what you've said. So I think it's also important to talk about what resilience is not. So resilience, again, I'm generalizing here, but I would say resilience is not something you're born with or not born with. I wrote here, not predetermined by DNA, but I'm not a geneticist, so I can't say that's true. But something that can be cultivated. The second thing is it's not about fixing. I think sometimes we get into this idea that we want things to be better and sometimes they're not. And sometimes we're stuck in a situation and we're living in a situation that's extremely painful and difficult and we're not going to fix it. So resilience has nothing to do with fixing it. It also doesn't have anything to do with minimizing suffering. We talked a little bit about that where this is not about toxic positivity, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. This is really about acknowledging the pain and difficulty and also accessing strategies and tools that will help us cope with it. And again, as I said earlier, it's not something that's ever achieved, but something that we're continually working on. And I also like to mention that it's not something that's individualistic. I hear some people say, oh, I'm not resilient. I wouldn't have gotten through that if I didn't have my husband's help. I like to say, well, it's because of your relationship with your partner that you have cultivated and that you have worked on that has helped you in this time. So I want us to recognize that it is not an individualistic thing, but it is something that we do in community. So some of you may be familiar with this Japanese art form of kintsugi. I love this slide because I think this is a good portrayal to me of what resilience looks like. It's never the same, but it's strong and beautiful in a new way. And I like this quote from a book called Fostering Resilient Learners: forever changed, not forever damaged. So this idea that we're not denying that there hasn't been harm and brokenness and sadness in it. And also it can evolve into something whole and beautiful and wonderful. So let's get to it. Scholars looked at resilient people and they did recognize this common set of protective factors, if you would. And I looked at them and I thought it might be cute to put them into kind of an alliterative list. Here we have people, positivity, pliability, problem solving, purpose, piety, and perseverance. And we're going to go through each of these briefly so we can dig into what this actually looks like. So I also want to say this list isn't complete. This isn't the end of the list. So if we could take a few seconds and just think, what would you add to this list? And it does not have to start with P, by the way, even though that might be cute. But is there something that's true for you? That's something that has helped you get through difficult or hard times? I do. Thank you. Yes. Humor. Yes, thank you. Humor.
Tracy.
Yeah.
Gail says support.
Support. Thank you. Empathy. And how about one more? Experience.
Got
Great.
music.
Music, thank you. Experience, music. So we're going to go through 7 today, but I don't doubt that there are many more and some that may be true just for you uniquely. So I invite you to think about those things as you go through this. So let's talk a little bit about people. Does anyone know who this is? My college students have no idea who this is. Yes, Gary Carter. So the New York Mets, I was a big Mets fan in high school and I played catcher. So Gary Carter was one of my role models. But strong social connections truly is one of the major keys to resilience. More and more studies show that connection increases people's longevity and increases their lifespan potentially. So there's a lot of evidence that's saying building these connections are important. And that's why I love talking about this in a church kind of context, because that's what you're all doing here. You're working on building social connections. You're working on building your relationship with the divine. You're working on building your relationship with the community. You're not home necessarily doing your own thing. You're here with one another. And that I think is so amazing. So I got an amen from the pastor. So, sorry. So these relationships can be with individuals, communities, mentors, mentees, or role models. It can be with therapists, spiritual directors, clergy, ancestors, nature, God, pets, etc. So these relationships that involve intimacy and frequency and positivity are relationships that can really help sustain us during difficult times. There was a minister who once asked his high school youth group, how many people in your life do you believe would love you unconditionally, no matter what you told that person? And almost none of them raised their hand. They couldn't think of one person. And meanwhile, the minister was feeling a little self-conscious because he would have hoped maybe to be that person for some of these people. So the question is, do you have those people in your life? And if not, that's okay. But what could you do to maybe start cultivating some of those relationships? So the next one we're going to go to, and again, please, if you have any questions or you want to push back on anything or anything you want me to go more deeply into, please let me know. I will also mention, oh yes, please. Do you want the mic or? Okay, yeah. I was trying to rephrase it, but sometimes it's tricky.
Since you're talking about people, it occurred to me when you mentioned at the beginning that if we had any questions to ask. And the question I have is, will you talk about the effects of COVID and the isolation that caused? Because that is certainly a factor here.
Absolutely. So the question was about COVID in general, but what I think is so powerful about the COVID example is as we go through these 7 specific characteristics, you're going to see how COVID affected every single one of them. They affected our relationship with other people because you know what? All of my social connection happened when I was dropping my kids off at school and seeing the other parents at drop off, or when I was having coffee with my sister, or these other things that were no longer happening. We see it in our sense of purpose. If we're not able to do some of the volunteering we were doing, et cetera. COVID affected us in so many ways. And why I'm so excited about this content is because the invitation is to recognize what it is for us. What are these characteristics that help us thrive and survive? And when we have circumstances that knock them off balance, what are we going to do to backfill, to be mindful of how they're changing? So I did a version of this specifically for older adults, because when you retire, so many of these characteristics change. Maybe our kids are in college and they don't need us as much anymore. Maybe our friends are moving to Florida. Maybe I'm not able to drive to church anymore. So many things are changing. And it doesn't mean that we just, are no longer resilient, but we may need to be a little more purposeful about, okay, well, I'm not able to get to that lunch group anymore. Maybe I can meet with them on Zoom, or maybe I need to make some phone calls. Maybe I need to ask the pastor to come visit me more often since I'm not able to go to church as often. So the invitation is to see where we are in this. And we're going to talk about that near the end, and do our best to say, well, what can I do to help build this up? And as things change, what can I do to make sure that that doesn't just fall off the radar or fall off as something that's been helpful to me? So I do love that question, because COVID undid almost every last thing. And we all, again, perhaps haphazardly, had to figure out new ways of being in the world. So positivity. I do love this quote. If you choose not to find joy in the snow, you will have less joy in your life, but still the same amount of snow. So this is an appropriate thing for today. Positivity is kind of a sensitive subject because there's such a danger in something we call toxic positivity. And that is a version of positivity that does not recognize the actual suffering or the difficulties we're experiencing. And also, there is a lot of evidence that shows that practicing positivity can help change how we see things and can help us become more positive people. So a recent study showed that people who were optimistic were 50 to 70% more likely to reach the age of 85. Positivity has been associated with increased lifespan, decreased depression and distress, stronger immune system, and better cardiovascular health. So there are ways that we can work to cultivate this. And again, it's not the be all and end all. None of these are. They're all working together and they're all related and they're all going to help us get through hard times. So things we can do to improve our positivity. And we've heard some of these already. We can be open to rituals and practices that celebrate gratitude. And what that might look like is, for instance, in my family, before we eat dinner or any meal, we each go around and say something we're grateful for, or we say something that was a highlight of our day. Doesn't mean that the day didn't have some really hard times in it. It's not saying that we can only focus on that one positive moment, but it's just an occasion to be like, you know what, that was kind of a joyful moment. That did spark some happiness in my spirit. Another one is being open to humor. And again, we heard this, laughter does release dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin, which are all feel-good chemicals. We can work on having a healthy lifestyle. And this is kind of a controversial one too, I would say, but also trying to spend time with positive people. And it doesn't mean that we don't spend time with people who may not fit that category, but you might know those people. You're like, oh, whenever I talk to Jane, I just feel lighter. I feel more joyful. I feel more hopeful. And especially during this time, I find that some of my friends I talk to and I get down these spirals of worry and negativity. And maybe there's some room for that. And some of them I'm like, oh, everything's going to be okay. So spend some time with those people. And there's so much more I could say about positivity. So I do this presentation anywhere from 45 minutes to 40 hours. So I'm trying to give you the 45-minute version of it. And I like this quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who obviously there's been a lot of talk of him lately. The essence of optimism is that it takes no account of the present, but is a source of inspiration, of vitality and hope where others have resigned. It enables a person to hold their head high, to claim the future for themselves, and to not abandon it to their enemy. So I like this idea. Is the glass half empty or half full? Well, maybe it's refillable. So you don't even have to answer. And so as we're going through these, you might say to yourself, oh yeah, I have such a good social support system. Oh, but positivity is something I can work on. Or you might say to yourself, oh, I really am a good problem solver. So what I want you to do is, as you're hearing me talk about each of these, I want you to think to yourself, which of these are areas where you have some strength already? And which are some areas that you might want to spend some time working on? I say that because pliability is by far my worst characteristic. This is my growing edge. This is where I hate change of all kinds. But when I spoke to a social worker when I worked in hospice, he was from the Buddhist tradition. And he said, you know, the people who are most peaceful at end of life are the people who are most adaptable to change. Because inevitably, as you can see here, difficulty, hardship, or trauma almost always leads to unwanted and unexpected change, which almost always leads to our need to acknowledge losses and to grieve and to live into the new reality. And I always say change, even change for the better, is difficult and requires us to grieve. So this idea of being pliable, I think, is really key. Whenever we experience something difficult, we are different, just like that kintsugi art we saw earlier. So we can ask ourselves about our adaptability. Am I an adaptable person? Do I like to be spontaneous? Do I have a hopefulness? Am I a creative person? These are all kind of characteristics that go along with pliability. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, in the face of the storms of events, the position of a believer is like a flexible plant. When a stormy wind hits, it shows softness and does not remain stiffly erect. And that's how we often think of strength as like, you're the rock in that. But ultimately, something that's more pliable and adaptable is actually stronger in that sort of situation. So pliability is something. And again, we'll talk a little bit about how we can work on these things, but even things like, okay, let's go to Vermont for the weekend. I literally just came home from Vermont. It wasn't something I was planning, but I'm not really a spontaneous person. I don't really like to do things at the last minute. Well, I was packing my bag yesterday, going to Vermont. So just practicing that and like, oh, I did that. And it was actually, I survived. I did something like, and then, or, so we can think to ourselves, how can I do things that kind of get me out of my comfort zone and invite me to be more flexible. Okay, working through these. Problem solving. This is a very complicated slide. And I always joke that problem solving, I think, is the least sexy of all of the characteristics, but really, really essential. Because as we talked about, unwanted or unexpected change does create in us a need to figure out how to live into our new reality differently. And didn't COVID do that to us, right? We had to figure out how to buy groceries. We had to figure out how to visit people we cared about. We had to figure out all new things. And it required so much problem solving. An Indian monk said, if you are in a dark room, don't beat the darkness with a stick, rather turn on the light. And I love that idea of not, the fact is there's something that needs to happen. There's something that needs to change. And we can do that by considering our values and our goals. I love the idea of working with someone on this, a friend, a pastor, a therapist, a life coach. These are things that we can work on. Again, practicing our imagination, practicing creativity, practicing vulnerability and humility. Those are all things that help us be better at solving problems. Okay. Next one is piety. And I don't love the word piety for this because what it really means is spiritual and or religious beliefs, practices, and communities. But that doesn't begin with P and isn't one word. So that's how I ended up with piety. This gives me a lot of energy. I'm a little biased because I am a Presbyterian minister, but I myself have found so much strength in my faith, in my relationship with people in my faith community, with my pastors. These are things that have helped me persevere. And I remember during my most challenging times sitting in an empty sanctuary and singing hymns by myself and knowing that that is exactly what I needed. So I do feel like whether people identify as religious or not, there are spiritual and or religious beliefs, practices, and communities with which we can connect. So a 2021 study showed that religious practice facilitates the use of two important things. The first is cognitive reappraisal. And what that is reinterpreting situations in a way that changes its emotional impact. And the other is something called coping self-efficacy, which is kind of like a fancy way of saying to the degree to which someone thinks they can cope with hardship or challenges. And I feel like that's what church has provided for me in a way. It's a belief that I can do this, I can get through this, and me reminding myself of that consistently. And I have this split up in thirds, but I don't think it's necessarily in thirds. But maybe like me, maybe you have a Bible verse posted somewhere that helps remind you to stay centered. Or maybe you do pull out the Psalms when you need a little uplift. So these are things that can help us persevere. I can go on and on about the difference between spirituality and religion because they're different and they both can provide us structure and value. Purpose. And again, is it meaning, purpose? There's a lot of things we can talk about here, but having a reason to live and feeling a sense of being of value and being needed, whatever that might look like, is very important to our resilience. I love, my friend was like, when he thought of purpose, he was like, okay, what's my calling? He was retiring from the Coast Guard and he's like, what's my calling? And that felt way too overwhelming to him. So he used the term, he wanted to explore his enthusiasms. And I love that. It's like, okay, it's not just one thing. It could be many things. It can be a lot of different things that can help us feel a sense of ability to persevere through hard things that give us life, that make us want to wake up in the morning. And I love this. Like, what is it for you? Well, maybe think about what are those things in your life that make you forget to eat. And that could be an indicator of what those things might be for you. And Rabbi Kushner said, our souls are not hungry for fame, comfort, wealth, or power. Our souls are hungry for meaning, for a sense that we have figured out how to live, that our lives matter. so that the world will be at least a little bit different for our having passed through it. And that is, again, when we look at COVID, many of us had things we were engaged in, and then those things were kind of stripped away from us. So the invitation is to figure out what that is. And you may have experienced this yourself, or you may know people who have retired and then have kind of a crisis of saying, well, who am I apart from this role I've played for so many years? And David and I know many people who kind of flunk retirement in the pastorate because they've gotten their sense of purpose through their ministry and have trouble figuring out what that looks like as a retired person. So this idea of purpose, and I think of two ways of looking at it in a way. Maybe our sense of purpose predates our hardship or difficulty. And in one case, I think of a dear friend who lost a child. Her sense of purpose as a mother to another child helped her get through that. So she really felt she directed her energy toward that other child in a way that was really constructive and helped her persevere through that loss. Again, not pretending, not denying the loss, not ignoring the suffering, not dismissing the grief, but as a way to give her a reason to wake up in the morning. In other cases, we can see, for instance, with Mothers United Against Violence in Hartford, they have experienced the loss of children to gun violence and have kind of focused their energy on preventing gun violence and enabling some important legislation that has happened. So that is a sense of purpose that kind of grew out of a hardship or difficulty. So those are ways that we maybe could look at purpose. So our last, so I would love to spend a few seconds on this if we could. Here we are. I would like you to take a look at this slide and maybe see what is true for you. If someone was like, what's your purpose? You're like, I don't like that, but what's your phrase? And if you want to shout it out. And actually, do we have the microphone? Okay, I would love it if you wanted to share and maybe give one sentence of why you picked that, something from column 1 and something from column 2, if you're willing to share. Anyone?
I guess I could go.
Go for it. Thank you.
Let's see. I would say, exploring, well, no, you already said that. Never mind.
Oh, you can say it.
No, I'm gonna say, discovering your passions. Because sometimes I think we might not even know that something makes us passionate until we experience it. And when we kind of dip our toes in something and we feel that spark, I think that's a source of resilience.
I love that. Like you feel the spark, right? I love that way of describing it. I should add that to the list.
Discerning my purpose.
Okay. And so why do you like that?
I am recently retired,
Okay.
and it's like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing now? Why am I here? I mean, so
Right.
I'll say discerning my calling.
Mhm.
And what was interesting is that you've talked about how COVID affected them. For me, COVID launched me into what I found as my calling for that period of time. I had gone to clinical pastoral education, quit my job, went and did this for one summer, an intense one summer at a hospital, and thought I was heading for chaplaincy, perhaps. What I discerned through COVID was I had previously worked in an assisted living, and my purpose was to be like a chaplain when chaplains could not come into our facility, and led services and did homilies and met with people dying and all of that. So, and it was a time period. I mean, doing something different now, which is raising grandchildren, but
Yes. That's a
but
great
was,
purpose.
it
Yes.
was a time when I knew what I was supposed to be doing.
Thank you. And so you bring up, I think, a couple of important points too, that it's not just one thing. maybe in the moment, it's one thing that's sparking our energy and our joy and our sense of fulfillment and helping us wake up in the morning. And maybe that thing will evolve. And also maybe it's multiple things at the same time, right? So I think when we say like, what's your purpose in life? Then it feels like it's just one thing and it's something I'm supposed to work my whole life toward. I'm on my third career personally. So I feel like it certainly does evolve, and God sometimes works in mysterious ways. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Okay, our last characteristic is perseverance. So this again is just the idea of getting through something, right? There's something that educators are talking a lot about, and this is growth mindset. And you might see, let me make sure I kept a slide. I did keep a slide about growth mindset. This is, it relates to positivity. It relates to problem solving. It relates to purpose. It relates to pretty much everything. And if we can work toward this, we will benefit in a million ways, and we can help our families and grandkids and kids and neighbors and nieces and nephews do this too. This is the idea that we can, that we're not just good at something or bad at something, but that we have the capacity to learn. And it sounds kind of simple, but is a really important key to resilience. So the idea that challenges can help me grow. I can learn to do anything I want. I like to try new things. These are things that we want to hear ourselves saying, and we want to hear the people we love saying, and we can help invite them to say these things. So I'm going to go back to here. Other aspects of perseverance is cultivating mental endurance. And that's really just about setting goals, pursuing education, working on our self-esteem. Something I like to say about perseverance, though, is the importance of knowing when to quit. Because I think sometimes we're like, I'm going to persevere through this, whatever it takes. But maybe the right choice is actually to make a decision that that's not the right choice for you at that time. So I think I don't ever want us to conflate perseverance with, I think it's important for us to recognize that when it's okay to say no. It's okay to say enough. It's okay to say, I'm done with this. And that's not a lack of resilience. That's not a lack of perseverance. That's maybe the best choice for you in that moment. Another thing is this idea of withstanding discomfort. And I always make fun of myself as a parent because my kids haven't really felt that uncomfortable. In my car, I have snack bars and water bottles and sweaters and hats, change of underwear. I have pretty much anything they could ever need to not be uncomfortable. And then I wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I really helping them say, you know what, I'm not that comfortable right now, and maybe that's okay. So again, we're not here to purposefully make ourselves uncomfortable. But if you ever notice yourself being uncomfortable, maybe you can just say, hey, I'm doing some resilience homework right now. Wish I could get more comfortable, but here I am. Because the fact is, if you think about times when you've been through hard things, it is not comfortable, right? And so that this is part of that. And there is a lot of evidence too about increasing our physical endurance. Our physical fitness is related to resilience as well. And that's another thing. It's like, oh, I don't really have time to work out. Well, I'm going to make it my resilience homework today. So that's what I want us to think about things as not like, oh, I have to do this thing, but hey, I want to become a stronger person, body, mind, and spirit. And this will help me do that. Okay, so here are the characteristics of resilience. And now I would love to do a little exercise. Give me 1 second here. Before we do that, yes, let's do this. Okay. This is a little awkward, and I like awkwardness. I'm embracing awkwardness in my life. What I would love for us to do in the room is different than what I'm going to invite the Zoom people to do. So first I'll go over the room. What I would love for us to do is find a partner or two, if you would like that. I would like you to share with the group something you're really proud of, something that you have accomplished that you're really proud of. It could be something big. It could be something small. This is not a competition of who did the best thing, because it's all amazing. What I want us to do then is the other members of your group and you, I want to talk about which of these 7 things went into that, right? So I might say, you know, I earned my Doctor of Ministry degree with 2 small kids. Okay, well, that your family must have helped out a lot, or you had somebody babysitting those people when you were doing your classwork. You must have been organized and you've done some problem solving, figure out how to do your homework and do your job at the same time. And so I want us to go through, maybe not all 7 of them will present themselves, but maybe we'll see some of them really bubble up. And I would like to spend maybe like 8 minutes doing that. I don't know, it's so specific, but is that okay? How much time do we have? By the way, I don't know that we ever really, is it an hour? Okay, so let's spend 10 minutes if we could. I'm going to invite the people on Zoom to do the same exercise, but I would love you to do it in kind of a journaling form. I would love for you to think of something that you accomplished and go through each of them. Okay, what did it take for me to get my Doctor of Ministry degree with 2 small kids? How did people play into it? How did my sense of purpose play into it? How did perseverance play into it? Based on some of the things that I've talked about. Okay. And if you are here with a partner or friend, you know, maybe you can mix it up and find someone you don't know and talk to them, but no pressure, because that makes it even more awkward. But all right. So right now on my watch, I have 6:18. So in 5 minutes, I'm going to let you know we're halfway done. And then, so if you're doing it in thirds, maybe you can pay attention to the clock too. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. And people on Zoom, go ahead and do this in a journal, please. Okay, are people ready to come back to our big group? And I hope our people on Zoom are still with us. Okay. So if we have the microphone, I think you have the microphone? I would love it if we could maybe get some folks to share something that you learned about yourself in this conversation.
Who's first?
Do we have any, here you are, you can practice being resilient right now, be a little uncomfortable and share with us.
No, Kim and I were both speaking, but when we look up here and we talked about the things we were proudest of, I think we tapped each one of those categories for each of our things, you know, so I just found that interesting.
Anyone else want to share something? Again, I invite you not to share what your partner maybe shared, because that may have been private, but anything you learned about yourself. Yeah. Thank you.
We talked about perseverance, and we acknowledged that in my own personal experience, I had what could be called as a very stubborn streak. That was my perseverance, but I was able to identify when the right thing to do was to not persevere anymore. So that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, we have a hand in the back there.
Well, something I discovered about myself is how much one of these things can affect one of the other.
Yes.
For example, you mentioned how change is difficult. My mother used to say, I hate the change of seasons because I hate the change of seasons. I've always hated change. So I realized how much, if you're not good at being pliable with some things, it also can affect your positivity with the change, one way or the other.
Yes. And arguably then it could work the other way. So if we're really trying to think positively about the change and saying, okay, I'm going to maybe spend a few minutes today not focusing on all the things that are making me anxious about this change, which still exist, and we're not going to pretend that they don't exist. But I'm going to spend 10 minutes today just thinking about the good things that are going to happen as a result of this change. So we can, kind of practice changing that thinking. But I'm right there with you. I'm not a changed person. I'm not that positive about it.
Just doing this exercise reminded me how uncomfortable it is for me and for many of the people that I work with to actually admit to being proud about something. That many of us who haven't had good role models for that, it can be harder than we think.
Thank you for sharing. And the reason I love this exercise, because it makes me excited to hear what other people are proud of. It feels good to share it for myself. And also what I realize is like the things that contributed to those accomplishments are also the things that are helping us get through hard things, right? So sometimes I think it's easier to see those things when we think about accomplishments. And then we can translate that and say, okay, well, that's how I was able to achieve X. Maybe as I'm going through this hard time, I can tap into some of those same resources that help me with that achievement or that accomplishment. If that makes sense. Would anyone else like to share what they learned about themselves? Or one thing we heard, oh, sorry.
I was proud of myself recently because I had what I thought was an original thought, and I'm sure it wasn't, but it was that God wants us to be aware of the passage of time because he gives us the seasons.
Thank you. And we talk about there's big accomplishments, there's small accomplishments. Let's talk for a second about what it required for all of you to be in these seats you're in or logged onto the Zoom, right? For the folks in the room, you had to figure out how you were going to get yourself here. You had to figure out transportation, which in my case turned out to be a big problem because I left my keys in Vermont to my car. But I have a ride home, thankfully. But we all had we had to be in relationship in some way with this congregation or with the newspaper to know to get here and figure out how to get here and get here on time. So there's so much that even went to you sitting in this chair. These 7 characteristics, I can probably go through all of them and figure out how that happened. So big accomplishments and small accomplishments are always working on these. And one thing that came up that I wouldn't be surprised if it came up elsewhere is the idea that sometimes we are working towards something or this accomplishment that we're excited about achieving, then all of a sudden there's these things getting kind of thrown into it, things that we didn't expect. And again, as a person who's not a big change person, I don't like things that I don't expect. So just recognizing that, like, even as we're going through life and we're dealing with things that we're not expecting, we are practicing our resilience. And I think maybe framing it that way will make me hate it less, right? Okay, well, I wasn't expecting this. My car keys in Vermont. Okay, well, let's figure out. So literally I can reframe it in almost like a funny way of saying it's annoying, right? And I'm going to figure out how to get to my presentation on time and maybe get a ride home. Anyone heading up to West Hartford? No, I'm just kidding. You are actually. So anyway, where am I? I'm distracting myself. Okay. If anyone wants to bring me back to Vermont, I'd be happy to go also. Okay, so here's just a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about cultivating resilience in ourselves, which is exactly what we've been talking about this whole time. But here are a few more concrete kind of examples. So connecting with life-giving individuals and communities. During COVID, I kind of got used to live streaming church. I kind of liked baking muffins while I was watching church. I liked doing these things. But then I realized, there's something important about the community, about me seeing people and noticing that someone had surgery or being supported by the people around me. So we can be purposeful about connecting with other people. We can be purposeful about acts of gratitude. And again, this is not saying that nothing's wrong. Everything's great. But We can give thanks for people and places and circumstances that give us joy. Some people have a gratitude jar and they'll write it on a piece of paper and put it in the jar. Sometimes people will have a journal where they'll just list things they're grateful for. So there are ways we can do this, and it does become a habit, and that's exciting and good for our spirits. We can grow with a spirit, with an open spirit and a willingness to change and fail. And here's an example. I'm with my college students and we're at an adventure park and there's a ropes course and everyone's climbing up 50 feet to climb across this log. And I was like, I am not doing that because I really hate heights. And then my students are like, oh, Tracy, jump up there with us. And so I was like, no way. And then I was like, no, you know what? It's uncomfortable, but I know I'm safe. And I'm going to do this. So these are examples of me literally telling myself, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to go out of my comfort zone, but I'm like, I'm going to. And I was so glad when it was over, but I was also glad that I did it. So we can try to find those opportunities for growth. This practicing mindfulness, please, the more I'm learning about it, the more important it is for our well-being, being able to find that centered space, that feeling of being at peace, even if it's just for a brief moment. Mindfulness practices are really important, and it could be also yoga or prayer, whatever practice might nourish your spirit. And then again, trying to embrace change with courage and curiosity. And even, I think of a hospice family I worked with, and the wife was so sad about her husband's condition that she didn't want to refinish the bathroom because for her that meant he was no longer able to use a bathroom that wasn't handicap accessible. And that made their experience more difficult, right? Her resistance to that change, or her the difficulty she had managing that change or facing that change, made it difficult for both of them. So there's just trying to recognize, okay, this isn't comfortable. This isn't what I want to do. This isn't what I want to experience, but this is what I am experiencing, and trying to live into that. And then we're also friends of people and family members of people, and we maybe want to have some strategies for how to help other people. These are some of those strategies. In helping provide tools and encouragement to people, empowering other people. And I love this story with my son. He came in one day when he was about 10 or 11, and he's like, oh, you told me to bring out the recycling and I just dumped it all into the trash bin. And I was like, oh, okay. So I get my shoes on and I'm going to go out there and move all the recycling from the trash to the recycling. And my husband says, wait a second, Tracy, why don't you have him go do that? And so then I was like, oh, okay, that's a nice idea. Oh, no, why don't you go do this? He found some rubber gloves. He went outside, he tilted the bin over so he could get the recyclables, and he took them from the trash and put them in the recycling. And here I was recognizing that I was trying to fix his problem. I was trying to solve his problem. I was enabling instead of supporting and encouraging. So this has really changed how I parent in a lot of ways, but how can we do that for people? How can we, help empower them and role model for them? And the people we work with and serve and love and live with, we can role model self-care and boundaries, and we can be honest about our feelings and authentic with what we're dealing with. And we can affirm people. I love this. I don't know if I know some of you attend church here. Have you sent David a little note saying, hey, I really liked that sermon last week? I don't doubt that they sometimes do. But these are things that really can, I think when we do those sorts of things, it helps us feel better and it helps other people feel better too. So just the idea of how can I be more purposeful about expressing my gratitude to people? And there was one time I wrote a thank you note and I got a thank you note back for the thank you note. I was like, oh, okay. I guess they needed that. Thank you. And we can help connect people. I love that too. So it's like, oh, hey, I think Joan and Joanne would really have a lot in common. Let me help build this network. So like we can always be kind of actively helping people connect with each other. And finally, just being a good friend, being a good active listener, and providing a space where people can share authentically and not feel judged, and you can affirm them and love them in that, even as they struggle. Yes. Okay, so the question was, how do these strategies connect to our resilience? So here are how many things? 5 things. I gave you that 7 characteristics. It's kind of like, okay, that's a great characteristic. Well, how do I build that characteristic? And so this is like, for instance, connecting with life-giving individuals and communities is related to people. And figuring out how to embrace change helps us become a more pliable person. So it's kind of a little bit of a simplified way of that. And then I also feel like, because sometimes we're caring for other people, it's helpful to see how we can help others cultivate their resilience. And I think doing that actually cultivates ours, because the more every time I have a meeting with a student at Wesleyan, I feel joy and I feel hope afterwards, so it's like, oh, I'm actually helping that person, right? But I'm actually helping myself by being present to that person. All right, so I do have this, but I know that like there may be snow coming soon. So what I'm going to do is invite you to just take a look at this. I'm going to explain it. And I would love for you to do this with a friend, with your journal privately, with a therapist, with whatever works for you. But maybe take a look at this wheel, and where do you find yourself? Maybe again, you have a really big social support network that you've spent years building, and maybe you're going to be right in the middle. That's a really dark, good one for you. But maybe you're really, you hate change as I do, and maybe you'd find yourself more on the outskirts. And so for people who are more visual, you can take a look at this and figure out, hey, where do I want to put my resources? And again, my invitation is for you. I'm going to show you a handout in a second, for you to really think about, okay, well, this is an area for growth. What tangible and specific things can I do? It's 2025 to build this characteristic. And I always laugh, like my friend will say, oh, do you want to go get lunch on Friday? Oh, I don't have time for lunch. Like I'm so busy with this and that. No, I'm going to make time for lunch, because that's resilience homework. And so that is what I'm so excited about this, is that these characteristics can be cultivated in ways that are actually really life-giving and fun. Starting a yoga practice, doing things that are outside of our comfort zone, going to a comedy show, making sure we have lunch with a family or friend, learning how to do yoga, going for more walks with my pet. These are all things that are literally resilience homework. And the more we purposely do those things, and then maybe we'll say to ourselves, oh, my hour-long walk every day is hindered because I'm injured now. What are you going to do instead? So that's kind of also like it's just something that's constantly evolving, and that I don't want it to seem like, oh, it's a chore, it's never going to get done. It's something we can constantly be having fun thinking about. So what I have this handout that I will give to the people, and maybe our Zoom people, we can figure out how to get it to you as well. It's a lot of words, as you can see. I love words. Down the side, I have the 7 characteristics. Okay. Here I have how we can self-assess ourselves. Like there's some questions here that you can ask yourself. We've done some of that work already today, and you've already started thinking about it, but here's some questions. Again, you can do it with a journal. You can do it in a small group. You can do it with a therapist, however you want to do this. And then on the far right, there's some strategy ideas, and there's a million ones I didn't mention here, but here's some to get you started if you're interested in working on some of these more purposefully. So I'll put them next to the cookies. Okay, so, and going back. Okay, so yeah, so some other books I liked. Who doesn't love Brene Brown? If you haven't started reading her stuff, like so good. There's also Angela Duckworth has like a well-known book now about grit. So there's a lot of other resources that are available that can help you on your resilience journey. And even if you just Google resilience, you'd be amazed at how many resources are now available, because so many people are talking about it. So you can journal more often. You can join a softball team. You can have coffee with friends. You can get to church maybe more often, join the Bible study. You can become an activist. Maybe there's some ways this year we will feel compelled to get involved in political life. What are we going to do to not only build our resilience, but to help ourselves feel healthier and to increase our well-being and to help us experience and thrive even in difficult circumstances. So thank you. So we do have like, I want to be sensitive because of the snow that's coming. Maybe want to do maybe 5 minutes for a few questions. Does anybody have any? And I should have said this in the beginning. I do not consider myself an expert by any means in resilience. What I'm excited about doing is just sharing some things that I have learned. So I'm not necessarily the best person to answer questions that may arise. So I feel like this is something we can kind of do together. If people have an answer that they would like to share to any of these questions, let's do that together. Okay, we have a question up here next, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Not a question, but a comment. Sometimes when you get out of your comfort zone, you find a new comfort zone.
He is full of wisdom tonight.
I just have a simple request. You had a slide up there that had two heads looking at each other.
Yes.
Is it possible to look at that again? Maybe take a picture of it? I found that to be
Yes.
wonderful.
And I can also make these available to David. And this, if you
Yeah,
Google
that one.
growth mindset, you will find so many great resources. There's great books on it. There's great diagrams and pictures.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Observation that, I'm reading The Anxious Generation.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
I'm surprised that you haven't mentioned the isolation and loneliness that can happen by too much screen time. And that we need to be really mindful of that, especially with young people who became tweens and teenagers between 2010 and 2015. We have a national crisis in mental health in that age group. And I don't think it's just them. I think there are a lot of adults, myself included, that are spending too much time on social media and not enough reaching out into the world.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. So I am not an expert in that by any means. And also, I recognize in myself when social media becomes that toxic person, quote unquote, right? When it is actually increasing my anxiety instead of it becoming something that's enjoyable. And so I think that's important for us to all recognize in terms of our resilience. Okay, how much of this can I stand today? How much of this is good for me? And how much of this is actually harming me? And somebody mentioned self-awareness. I think that should be one of the P's, begins with a S, but because really part of this is recognizing our own needs and recognizing what's working for us and what's not working for us, how we're feeling, what we need to adjust, all of those things. But that's a tough one, especially right now.
I'd like, without being presumptuous, I'd like to add another P.
Oh, please.
Which is perspective.
Oh, good
And
one.
often.
Oh, that was not me. That was not me yelling at him about that.
So it's actually these moments when you kind of say, or when you're with someone and they offer a different perspective and you say, oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that can be a healing kind of factor in this.
Yes, perspective. Thank you. Love that.
Hi. I can't count the number of people that I've talked to recently who have, when I ask them if they know about something going on, they'll say, oh no, I have 100% turned off the news. I'm not watching it. I'm not reading any papers. I don't want to talk to you about anything that's current or actively going on. And I understand the overwhelm, but I'm getting really lonely because I've still not, I can't put my head into the sand 100%. And the everything that's going on these days, the political situation, everything else, I just wonder if you have something to add or insights about how other people in your community, that you can keep talking to them.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, I'm not an expert. I will say, what we're doing at Wesleyan, for instance, is we're working on putting together a time for people to come and share their concerns. And people can come if they want, and they can not come if they don't want, right? So the idea, I think it's important, based on the research, to be in solidarity with people who share some of your angst. And what I have read recently is it's good for us to look and say, okay, what are the two things that are most troubling to me? How can I plug into those two things? Right. So if it's climate, or if it is a nomination for a certain cabinet position, or if it's something, trying to take off bite-size things for us to focus energy on, to help prevent that sense of overwhelm. And so that is what I've been kind of advising my students to do, and also myself, to say, okay, I'm concerned about 20 things. What are the two things I'm going to put my energy toward? And if we all do that, we'll have a lot of people doing a lot of good things, a lot of important and productive things, instead of us all feeling overwhelmed by all 20 of those things. But again, I'm not the expert, so if other people have feedback about that.
I just, as a moment of hope, if you write your legislator that's in your district, if they get 7 calls or emails, they do something. That's all, 7. And I have just put a voicemail on Senator Murphy's phone saying, we need guidance. You are doing a fabulous job of speaking out. He's getting death threats this week because of his opposition to what's happening. And we need to not only support him, but to say, please tell your constituents what we can do to support you in your work. I really hope you'll do it.
That's cool. That's great. I appreciate you saying that. Somebody posted on Facebook, sorry, social media, but I use social media as a positive thing, and I don't spend millions of hours on it. But somebody I respect highly spoke specifically about that, and they said emails are a waste of time. If you email your senator or congressman, usually it doesn't even get answered. But calls, on the other hand, she was reporting this because she had a conversation with a staffer, So as you said, 5 to 7 phone calls. And so you could set it up on your phone. And to be honest, I've had my head in the sand a little bit with the federal government. I've always thought it was a little bit like Oz, the Wizard of Oz. And I really work locally. That's my goal. That's my life. But I am going to put those numbers in my phone and call them.
And so I think that it's important. I love what you're all saying. It's important for us to figure out what is our purpose, right? Like, what is important to us? What are we feeling called to do right now? And what can we do? Tangible, small things. And even small things are important. So if we're not necessarily in a position where we can go to Washington, D.C. and march on Washington, there are many other things we can do about issues we care about. I'm so happy about this WISE council that they have here, helping educate people about mental health and well-being. So there's things you can do super locally. There's things you can do on a state level. There's things you can do nationally, all like from the comfort of your own home some of the time. So just figuring out how to channel that energy. And I'm also trying, this sounds maybe judgmental, but I'm trying to find some grace for people who are like, I'm out. I don't want to see anything, because I know that that's what they need. And I respect that. Even though it worries me in some ways, I also know, good for them. They know what they need right now, and they're taking a break from this. So I think there's both, right? Like, and if figuring out what is right for each one of us in this moment, knowing that will change day to day. Maybe next week I'll have less capacity to engage, and maybe 2 weeks from now I'll have tons more. So just being sensitive to that in our own spirits, what we can do and can't do. And I guess I'm kind of jealous of those people. Like, okay, they know what they're self-aware. They know what they can and can't engage with right now. And they're setting some boundaries. So that can be healthy for us too, if we're needing to do that. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Okay, I am the worst salesperson. I'm like blushing about this, but David did ask me to bring some books. You can get them on Amazon, which they're more expensive on Amazon, weirdly. I did not set the price. The publisher set the price. I don't get them for free. So I'm charging here just $1 more or so than I'm actually paying for them, just because I want them to get them out into the world if they're helpful to people. They also, as I said, there's one in the West Hartford Public Library that you can check out. They're $15 and I take Venmo. I take cash. Checks are fine. And also we have one more announcement about WISE. Right, you're doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people that we do have the suggestion cards. So if there is a topic that you would like us to pursue some additional information on or address in some way, please fill this out. I'll put it with the handouts that are here by the cookies. So cookie suggestion paper.
Tracy,
Welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged around issues of emotional well-being and mental health.
can you tell us what the name of the book is?
So the name of the book is Weathering the Storm, Simple Strategies for Being Peaceful and Prepared. And it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It is at the Christian bookstore. And those are different places you can find, and also through the publisher at With in Stock. And right here.